I am Jeff. I am one of the SPO missionaries here with CSU, and today I'm just going to be talking a little bit about discernment, and not, when I say discernment, I don't mean like, is God calling you to be a Catholic priest discernment, but more general, just discernment. What does that really mean? And how does it apply in all different ways to our life? And so just to say first, discernment, if some of you might be wondering, what does that even mean? Discernment really just means the process by which we come to know God's will for our life. Because that's a very basic thing that we believe as Christians, is that God has a plan for the world, and he has a plan for each one of us in particular. And so that means that God has a particular will for how our lives will unfold, what we will do, the things that will happen in it. And that's very fundamental. So discernment is just the process of figuring out what that is and living in it every day. And so the first essential question for how to apply discernment is really, do you believe that? Do you believe that God has a plan for your life? Do you believe that God has a particular will for your life? It's really good to ask yourself that question. Because it's not intuitive. We have such a strong will for our own life that sometimes we can forget that there's someone else that might have something to say about it. And I find a very impractical but helpful thought exercise is just imagine for a second that God has complete autonomy over your body. This is, again, very impractical, but a little helpful. Just imagine that God has like total control over your body for a whole day, from the minute that you wake up to the minute you go to bed, you know? Like what would your day look like? What would your life look like? What time would you wake up? What would you do as soon as you wake up? How long would you pray? How would you pray? What would you do that day for lunch? Would you eat by yourself? Would you eat alone? Like, when would you study? Where would you study? How long would you study for? What kinds of things would you do in the midst of your day? How would you talk to people? Just certain things like that. And then you can even open it up into longer term. Like, how would you plan your goals? How would you go about, making bigger life decisions, things like that. And so that's just a helpful thing to think about, because when we think about that, we realize like, wow, God actually would have me living probably a certain way, which is crazy to think about. God has a desire for our lives to look a certain way. And then the next question to ask is, if God has a plan for my life, do I want it? Am I open to it? Or am I so enraptured in my own plans that do I just forget about it? If we think about it long enough, we'll find the answer is yes. Because if we know who God is, we realize that whatever he wants for us is really worth going after. It's going to be worth figuring out what he wants for our life, what his plan is for our life, not simply just what we think our best options are, because we want good things for our life. We want to make a difference. We want to have an impact. We want to have a fulfilled life. But the best way that we can accomplish all those things is through God's will for our life. And so again, this is applied to so many different things, from the biggest decisions of, vocation, to smaller decisions like what do I want to study, or what do I want to take this class, or smaller things. Not quite down to the smallest things like, do I want ham or turkey on this sandwich? That doesn't need to be discerned. But the rest of our life, kind of when we're deciding between two things that may be both good, God may have something to say about that, and it's worth wrestling with to figure out what it is he might say. And so just some practical tips to help in discernment. The first is to cultivate a life of prayer. If you are not cultivating a life of prayer and trying to pray every day and pray with scripture and get to know God's voice through a life of prayer, then it's going to be tough to be able to hear his voice speak into the plan for your life and the direction of your decisions and where your life goes. And that's a key element to discernment, is being a person of prayer. And then the second is to have people around you who can help reflect God's will for your life through their influence. And so have spiritual people who you talk to regularly, have spiritual mentors that you talk to regularly who can hear where you're at with your decisions, with your life, and with your life with God, and can help speak wisdom. And just sometimes it helps to have other people speak clarity into discernment decisions. Just helps you to understand a lot more what God is doing. And so that's a very basic sketch of discernment. Many, many talks could be given on discernment, and this is just scratching the surface. But hopefully it's something that we're always learning about, because we always want to be wrestling with God's will for our life and always going in that direction. So we'll always be learning more about this topic, and wish everyone the best in this area.